Hello, BookTube. It's finally time. It's been a while since I made the announcement for my uh, Q&A, and it's been much delayed in getting around to doing this, but I am finally going to answer your questions. So, as a reminder, this Q&A was in celebration of finally getting around to making the paperback releases of both A Merchant in Oria and Other Tales, as well as Monster Huntress, and you can find the links to pick those up down below. So let's just get right to it. We're going to just start answering questions. The first one is from none other than Steve Donahue. And it was, do you have a set amount of time you read per day, or is that almost always dictated by the lay of the land? And I make a very concerted effort to read every day, but that is not always possible in the amount of time that I desire, and some days it's not even possible beyond a few moments here and there. So it's definitely dictated by the lay of the land. I've got two little ones, and so my time goes to them and to my wife. Those are always going to be the priority, and but I do almost always have time to read at some point in time during the day. I commonly take a book with me to read at least some during my lunch if I'm not having to run errands or anything like that. And so that's a big part of how I'm able to get through some books. It's just carving out a little bit of time for sure each and every day uh, in those moments where I can. And, I've got books down here that I'm in the middle of reading. I've got books upstairs that I'm in the middle of reading. I've got a book on my phone that I'm in the middle of reading. So I've always got something near at hand that I can pick up if I've got 10 or 20 minutes to that just happen to appear to be able to make a little bit of progress. So yeah, it varies. So Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot asked, I once noticed chickens in the background of one of your videos. What animals do you own? Is it just chickens? Are they your chickens? Fascinated by the chickens. Yes, we own 6 chickens. They are definitely not my chickens. They are more of my wife's chickens and my son's chickens. They are the big fans of the chickens. I tolerate them. They're fine. They give us eggs. So we also have 2 cats, whom you may end up seeing in the background off and on during videos. We've had them for probably about 10 years almost for one of them and 8 or 9 for the other. So they're getting up there in age. They aren't super active. Again, they're more of my wife's than mine. Someday, maybe I'll have a dog because I've always been more of a dog person. We just haven't gotten around to having a dog yet, and our son isn't exactly the bravest person around dogs. He's a little skittish around them. I think just because he tends to meet ones that are about his size, so he's like, okay, I'll let you aggressively lick me. So. Okay, next we have a flurry of questions from Tony from An Erudite Adventure. What is your favorite dragon? And you might think it'd be Smaug, and that's a good answer. And you might also think it's the dragon from Beowulf, which would also be a great answer. But the answer would actually be the dragon Fafnir, which is if you don't know Fafnir, you should check it out. There's a great story involving Fafnir. What is your favorite Tolkien story? That's a tough one. I haven't looked at these in advance. Well, it's been a long time since I've seen these. I think Leaf by Niggle would be my favorite Tolkien short story. Although Farmer Giles of Ham is great. You've got Smith of Wooten Major. They're all really fun and enjoyable stories. That's not even considering all of the stories inside of like the Silmarillion, where you'd have things like Baron and Luthien, which are great stories as well. What is my favorite color? Green. Who is your favorite author? If Tolkien, choose your second. So Tolkien is, of course, the number one. And number two is a little harder to pick from. I think my gut is telling me it's probably, at this point in time, having rediscovered him, going to be Ray Bradbury. Almost through finishing Dandelion Wine, which came out of nowhere and blindsided my reading. And I'm absolutely enjoying it. And I feel that way every time I'm reading something by Bradbury. The other day I was at the library and killing a little bit of time, and they had a couple of little essay collections by Bradbury. I just picked one up and just started reading the first couple pages, and I'm just like, this guy writes in a way that is just wonderful, magical, and I love it. So if you haven't read much by Ray Bradbury, do yourself a favor and check out more of his stuff, because it is just fantastic, whimsical, magical. Yeah. What is the largest book you own? Interpret this however you want. Um, well, I mean, you could consider as one the Histories of Middle Earth, in which case you've got this big old 12-volume set contained in 3 volumes. But I think the biggest book I actually own is this Riverside Shakespeare, which is his complete works with notes and everything. And the biggest in terms of size for height would be the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. So this is wonderful. Has lots of great images in there and other things to accompany the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, which I read that in its entirety for Ancients-Thon last year in June. Is there one of your stories that you had the most fun writing? If so, which one? Yes. I have enjoyed a lot of my stories that I've written. The one that's come back to me the most often have been ones regarding Ava, who's the protagonist in my Monster Huntress book. I've got a couple of short stories in my short story collection as well that feature her as an adult, and so those have always come back to me. But the most fun story that I wrote was probably A Merchant in Oria. I had an absolute blast with that one. And I think you can get that feel from the first couple of pages of it, with some of the fun and unique encounters he has, and then exploring the flawed hero and the hesitant hero. He's very reluctant to step up and take charge and be that hero. I love that story, and I need to go back and revisit it sometime soon and just enjoy it. And then I'd say second after that would probably be Words Like Rain, which was just a very imaginative. I just let my imagination run free in that one. It just had an absolute delight. And both of those, along with those Ava stories, are found in A Merchant in Oria and Other Tales. Then, would you like more questions? Yes, absolutely. Feel free to leave any follow-up questions in this video. I'll come back to them. I promise it will be in less time than it took me to do this video. So, Gemma from Gem of Books asked, when did you start writing your first published book? So, my books were published back in, I believe, 2018. Originally by a good friend who was part of a small press. And they didn't last very long. About 2 years, maybe. And there were some things that were not very pleasant about the whole process and everything. But Monster Huntress, I started writing probably in 2014 or 2015. It was one of those where I was on again, off again with it a lot. So I'd make some progress on it, and then I'd leave it aside for a while, and then I'd come back and I'd work on it some more. And my first draft, when I finished it, was only about 27,000 words, so it was very short. I'm very much a pantser as a writer rather than a plotter. And so I was going in there with the intention of getting down all of the big story beats, and most of those absolutely survived. And every revision from there was just expanding out the different scenes that would build character and build the land around Ava and all of that, and adding depth and richness to it. And unfortunately, in the editing process with the editor that we had, in addition to doing some great work on helping to tighten up the way I would phrase some things, we had a little disagreement on. So Tolkien drips a lot of lore into the stories. He references people, places, things, battles, events that you never see on page. And the editor went and cut a lot of those. And I debated going and trying to insert those back in. But I decided, you know what? It's okay. I'm happy with it as it is. I'll leave it how it was and then work on building that lore back up over time. So yeah, it long answer to give you the. It was about 2014 or 2015 when I started writing it. It was finally published late in 2018. So DDB asks, excluding Beowulf, can you recommend a favorite non-fiction book set in or about the Anglo-Saxon period of Britain? Preferably not a mammoth, something for a beginner. Thanks. Okay, so non-fiction book set in or about the Anglo-Saxon period of Britain. Well, one of the books that I would recommend going over here to my medieval shelves, which we'll get around to eventually with my book tour. We got this one's a good one. See, this is why I need to prepare ahead of time. Where is my... Alright, so I might not have it on my shelf anymore, which surprises me a little bit. But that's okay. Sure, it's around somewhere. So the first one I'm going to recommend is a primary source from the time. Well, yeah, it was written in 1136, and it's a great one. I will throw out the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles is not a very interesting read, but it is a very it passes good information. But I will recommend Geoffrey of Monmouth, The History of the Kings of Britain, is a good place to start because it is going to talk about 2,000 years. So from the founding of Britain, and I mean this has got the first appearance of Arthur in there. So some of the things in here might be kind of legendary, but it is a good place to go for some good background information on the medieval ages. And then I was going to look for the Time Traveler's Guide to Middle Ages, which I had on my shelf. Must have misplaced at some point in time. So I'm not going to keep looking for that, but by Ian Mortimer. And that one gives you a kind of a feel for what life was like for the people living around 1400, I believe is when he said it. And that's a good way of getting a background of England. And then for the Anglo-Saxon period particularly, I should have grabbed this one while I was down here. I can absolutely recommend the Viking Wars, which I'm most of the way through, have been most of the way through for a while, and just haven't been able to get back around to it. Guess what I'm going to be picking up in March to finish? So there you have it. a couple of recommendations there. So, Anne with a book, who just recently got married. And congratulations again to you on that, Anne. What is the most challenging book you have ever read? Oh my. The one that I had the biggest challenge getting through and finishing was Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I had a stubborn streak in me where I refused to DNF a book. And so it ate away at me that I continuously had to DNF Moby Dick. I probably tried it 5 or 6 times before I was finally stubborn enough to make my way through the entire thing. And the last time going through, I was able to appreciate the story chapters, but I still absolutely loathed the stuff in between. You cut all of those out, and it's got a good story in there. But when the pace of it is broken up every 10 or 15 pages by another 10 or 15 pages on whaling or the making of a rope and things like that, it just kills it, and it makes it a little bit more challenging to read. I imagine if I went back and revisited it now, I would have a better experience than I had previously because I'm a different reader than I was back then. But, that one has my most storied history with it as being a very challenging book that I got through. And I'm not in a hurry to revisit Moby Dick. Also, do you read books differently as a writer than you do as a reader? Like, do you read books more for enjoyment like a reader, or more to understand writing parts like description, character, etc.? So that's a great question, and you might think that it would be the latter, and it's not. I enjoy it purely as a reader, and I prefer to gain those benefits of description, character, the writing parts, picking up on how they do those things. I prefer to pick those up more naturally rather than trying to force myself to look for those things. Because you soak up all of that over the course of time. So there's no reason to rush it along. And I think if I tried reading through a book solely to look at how the writer did things, it would lessen the enjoyment of the story being told. So yeah, I'm always approaching it as a reader first and foremost. I can absolutely appreciate at times what I encounter as a writer. So Jeremy Fee asks, I would love to hear the story of what your inspirations were for writing A Merchant in Oria. And so this goes back to my friend who co-founded the little publishing thing. So it was, I think, like in 2012 or 2013. We were all, she was blogging, I was blogging, and there were a couple others of us, and there were 4 of us that, in particular, pretty good friends in terms of being writers and reading each other's work, commenting on, critiquing, enjoying what everybody was writing. And so we dubbed ourselves kind of like the Fab Four. And we did a series of little snippets where we'd have one person start a story and write the first, couple hundred words. Then the next person would pick it up from there and write a couple more hundred words. And so, they were just short stories. And that's how a Merchant in Oria was born. The first 500 or 600 words of that was the beginning of that. It was up through when he encounters the lady dwarf, which is always has stood out as one of my favorite scenes in there. And I did not really enjoy the direction that it went from that beginning. And so eventually I went back and said, I really, really enjoyed writing that beginning, and I think there's a story to tell here. And so I took it from there and continued writing as if they hadn't gone and carried it off in a different direction, and expanded it out, and it turned into A Merchant in Oria. And I still absolutely love the story to this day. So David Wardrop asks, do you play any computer games? Unfortunately, not really. I don't have much time for computer games. I've played a few over the course of the years. I tend to play more on console. We have a Nintendo Switch that my 5-year-old absolutely loves playing various Mario games on there. Right now, he's very obsessed with playing Super Mario Odyssey, and so we usually get at least 20 or 30 minutes most days to play a little bit of one of those games. And then we have a PlayStation 4, which he doesn't have any games on that yet. And I grew up in the original Nintendo days playing games like Final Fantasy and Dragon Warrior and Legend of Zelda. And so I grew up cutting my teeth on the genre that became the JRPGs. And so if I'm going to play a game, it's probably going to be something in the mold, more of those classic JRPGs. So my favorite game of all time is Final Fantasy VI, which was on the Super Nintendo. And it's a delightful game. And currently on the Switch, I'm working my way through Octopath Traveler, which is a really, really delightful callback to those older RPGs. And then on my PS4, I'm playing through Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. But there was a while because my wife enjoyed watching me play games like The Last of Us and Uncharted and Assassin's Creed and those types of games, where I played a lot more of those. Played Skyrim and things like that, and it hit me with playing Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild that I'm not really one for the fast pace where you've got to button mash, you got to be able to hit them faster than they can hit you in order to advance further and explore the wide open world. I prefer more of a narrative story and to have combat where I'm able to be more thoughtful and do a turn-based approach. And that went off on a tangent there, sorry. But yeah, I've played a few computer games. Portal, I absolutely love Portal. Need to get around to playing Portal 2. There's not enough time. I played a ton of Civilization 2 back in the day. Always enjoyed that. RK Stumbling Bear. So Rachel asks, what is your favorite sci-fi book? And that's an easy one to answer. Well, had been an easy one to answer because for so many years, ever since I read it in high school, I had a great teacher in, I think, my junior year. Might have been my sophomore year, where I had this class and we read books like The Hobbit. And one of the books in there was Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, and I fell in love. Absolutely delightful book. And just reread it earlier this year and enjoyed it so much still. Read Ender's Shadow for the first time a couple weeks ago and absolutely loved it. And in time, there's a dark horse contender to overtake Ender's Game, and that's Hyperion by Dan Simmons. So we'll see which one ends up emerging on top over time. Right now, it would still be Ender's Game, but I think upon a reread, depending on how the rest of the Hyperion Cantos goes, Hyperion and those other 3 books in that series might overtake it. Aaron Facer asks, I would like to ask what it was that got you into writing and whether you have any writing plans for the future. I've always enjoyed telling stories. I've always had a creative side to me. And sometimes it gets pushed out into an outlet such as this, making videos, because it's still being creative, being able to put out content for others to enjoy. I've done blogging. I've done reviews of both books and of board games. So I'm even if I'm not always writing books, I'm always making some kind of content, and it's something that I enjoy as a kind of a thing to do on the side. It gives me that outlet because I can't draw, so that's never been my calling. I mean, with a lot of effort and a lot of dedicated time, I could probably improve on being able to draw better. I've I know there's some flashes of talent in there if I wanted to hone it, but it's a long hill to climb up, and I've enjoyed reading for all of my life, and so I enjoy telling stories as well. So it was just something that naturally evolved from that, having, English classes throughout school where you'd have to write stories and be able to do that. For my bachelor's degree, which I got in English, I was able to make a kind of a little writing portfolio, which in that I actually did a lot of experimental poetry, taking things, and that's where taking down Goliath, which is in A Merchant in Orient and Other Tales. It's written in Spenserian stanzas. That's where that came from, because I was imitating styles of some of the big poets, and had a lot of fun with that. That's something I'd like to go back to that collection and kind of shape some of those others up, and maybe polish some of them up, and go back to experimenting in various poetry styles, because it's fun. I know poetry today shuns having form and style, and following any kind of a dedicated format, but I find that it actually forces you to be creative in ways where being able to just freely write however you feel like and call it poetry does not. So yeah, there's that. And do I have writing plans in the future other than wanting to get back to writing some poetry? Yes. Chipping away at a short story that I feel is kind of a Bradbury-esque influences. And eventually, I'd like to get back to finishing the rest of Ava's story, which starts in Monster Huntress. At the time, I figured it probably would end up being a trilogy. I've had ideas over the years of where the next book will take her. And yeah, I think that at this season in life, it's still kind of on the back burner just because of family and the little ones, and the remembering how much time it took uh, to be able to say, hey, I just need to shut myself up and just write for an hour or two. And that time's harder to come by now, which, I mean, look at how long it's taken me to come back around to make this 30-minute Q&A video. Sometimes it's just really, really tough to find that time. And it's really, really tough when you've got several hobbies that all call at you. You say, okay, I want to do something, and I feel like I should do this. So I want to read, I want to write, I want to make booktube videos, I want to blog, I want to play board games, I want to play video games, and do all of those things, and still find time to balance working and family and all of those things. Being able to not buy books kind of helps, because then I'm not going out book shopping, right? Right? All right, so last question here is from Beth Ann. She says, I think I'm repeating what others have asked below, but I'm curious to hear what your inspirations were behind all of your books. What might be the next thing you find inspiring in your writing? Any tips for making new friends to play board games with? So the first thing, the inspiration behind my book, so Monster Huntress, what inspired that was the short stories where she started. I loved the character that came out from Ogre Hunt enough that I expanded on it into the next story, which was called Doppelganger Danger. She's the unnamed, I think she's unnamed in it, but she's the protagonist in Taking Down Goliath, that Spenserian poet. And so I found that she was taking up a lot of my short story writing space, so I wanted to finally write a book, and she was the natural choice as my protagonist. And I decided at the time that I wanted to go back and write her origin story, the progression of her growing into the role of being somebody that hunts monsters. And so she starts off in Monster Huntress being rather young. And yeah, I don't want to give a ton away, but she's young. It's a book that is kind of walks the line between middle grade and being young adult without the young adult tropes. So those of you looking for something to read for middle grade March, I'll throw my own book into that ring. You can pick up a digital copy for a couple of dollars, and if money is an issue, please reach out to me. Don't let that be the issue, because I would much rather have my book be read and enjoyed by others than to hoard it to myself and make that be a barrier to prevent you from being able to read it and enjoy it. Then the next question she had on there, what might be the next thing that you find inspiring in your writing? Right now it's Bradbury and poetry. Those are getting a lot of my writing headspace for creative stuff. Re-exploring poetry has been a delight, and then picking back up Bradbury for the first time since November. Or no, early December. I think I finished A Graveyard for Lunatics in early December. But for the first time in a couple months, because I'm going to read everything by Ray Bradbury. It's just been a delight reading Dandelion Wine. And then any tips for making new friends to play board games with? It's crazy to say this, but what I found, so there's twofold ways to go about this. And there's finding a store somewhere locally that has a gaming space for people to gather to. Typically, they'll have some kind of a night during the week that's dedicated for people to show up and play board games. And so that's a great way to get involved in the community. And going kind of paired with that, social media. Locally, we have a Facebook group, Des Moines Area Board Gamers, where you can join it, and then people talk about board games, they share things, they make plans, they recap what games have been played during those board game meetup weeks. And typically, somebody will chime in, hey, I'm new to the area, or I'm moving to the area, or something along those lines. And people will quickly help point out, here's all the different places that you can go to play board games during the week. So that's the way that I would recommend to find new people locally to play board games with. Find that, by and large, it's a community that's welcoming. They want people to play. They want to have more people show up, bring more games, all of those things. And that brings us to the end of the questions. I thought this might have to be a multi-part video, but I was able to get through with only a little meandering and only a little digging through the bookshelf. So thank you. I'm sorry for how long this took to get around to making, but I was determined today when I woke up. I'm like, I am going to start this Q&A, even if it means the library tour is delayed. So stay tuned. The library tour will probably continue tomorrow with a shelf of primarily fantasy. And have a great day, BookTube.